In the depths beneath the imperial palace, where the very bones of Terra grown under 10,000 years of accumulated weight, there exists a throne that devours 1,000 souls each day just to keep one man breathing. Not a man anymore, something else. Something trapped between godhood and extinction, between the hope of an entire species and the crushing inevitability of its doom. The Emperor of mankind sits upon the golden throne, and the Imperium prostrates itself before the myth of his eternal watch. But what does it mean to be a god who cannot move, cannot speak, cannot die? What does it mean to sacrifice everything for a dream that has become a nightmare? This is not just the story of the most powerful psyker who ever lived. This is the story of ambition that reached too far, love that turned to bitterness, and a vision of perfection that shattered into endless war. This is the story of humanity's last and greatest weapon, and perhaps its cruelest tyrant. This is the complete lore of the Emperor of mankind, and nothing in the galaxy has ever been more tragic or more terrifying. Before we descend into the labyrinth of his history, into the secrets that the Inquisition would burn worlds to protect, do me one favor. If you want to see more deep dives into the darkest corners of the Warhammer universe, if you want scripts that treat this lore with the weight and horror it deserves, hit that like button right now. Share this with someone who thinks they understand the Imperium. Subscribe, because we are going places the ecclesiarchy does not want you to see. The algorithm does not care about quality, it cares about engagement, and your click right now determines whether stories like this survive. So make your choice. Now let us begin. There are legends older than history, whispers that predate the first written word, stories that the administratum does not acknowledge because they cannot be verified, quantified, or controlled. The origin of the Emperor is one such legend, and yet it is the foundation upon which the entire Imperium rests. Before the first hive spire rose from Terra's poisoned soil, before the first starship ever breached the void, before humanity even understood that it was not alone in the universe, there was a moment of collective sacrifice that defied every natural law. They were shamans, those ancient humans, psychers before the word existed, souls touched by the immaterium, capable of seeing the threads that connected thought and reality. For uncounted generations, they had guided their tribes, healed the sick, communed with spirits, reincarnated again and again because their knowledge was too valuable to lose. But something was changing in the warp. The birth of awareness, of sentience, of emotion in biological life was creating ripples in the immaterium, and those ripples were coalescing into something predatory. The shamans saw their own souls being devoured after death, consumed by the first stirrings of what would one day become the Chaos Gods. Reincarnation was no longer guaranteed. The cycle was breaking. So they made a choice that no sane being would ever make. Thousands of them, gathered in a place that has been lost to time, performed a ritual suicide. They died as one, their souls merging in the warp, pooling their power, their knowledge, their will into a single point of light so bright that it could not be extinguished. And from that confluence of sacrifice, a child was born. Not a normal child. Not even a normal psyker. This was an immortal, a being whose soul was composed of thousands of others, whose power eclipsed anything humanity had ever produced. This was the Emperor of mankind, though he would not bear that title for many thousands of years. He was born in the ancient past, in the time when humanity still huddled in caves and feared the dark, and from the moment of his birth, he was alone. No peers. No equals. Only the slow march of time and the weight of a purpose he had not chosen but inherited from the shamans who had died to create him. He knew, even as a child, that humanity was fragile, that the warp was dangerous, and that if his species was to survive the horrors lurking in the immaterium, it would need guidance. It would need a protector. It would need him. But he was patient. The Emperor did not reveal himself. He did not descend from the heavens and demand worship. Instead, he walked among mortals, century after century, millennium after millennium, learning, teaching, shaping events from the shadows. He was there when the first cities rose in Mesopotamia, when humanity transitioned from nomadic survival to organized civilization. Some say he was the king who wrote the first laws. Others say he was the scientist who taught metallurgy, agriculture, astronomy. The truth is probably all of it and none of it. He wore many faces, played many roles, and never stayed long enough for anyone to realize he was not aging. He was a philosopher in Athens, debating ethics and governance. He was a general in Rome, understanding the logistics of empire. He was a mystic in the East, teaching meditation and the control of the mind. He was always moving, always learning, and always preparing humanity for a future it could not yet imagine. Because he knew what was coming. He could see the warp more clearly than any human who had ever lived, and he knew that the entities forming in its depths were not content to remain passive. Chaos was patient, but it was also hungry, and sooner or later it would turn its attention fully toward the material realm. The Age of Strife confirmed his worst fears. Humanity had reached for the stars, colonized thousands of worlds, built an interstellar civilization that rivaled anything the galaxy had seen since the war in heaven. And then, in an instant, it all collapsed. Psykers began manifesting en masse, uncontrolled, untrained, their minds tearing open rifts into the warp. Demons poured through. Warp storms cut off entire sectors. Artificial intelligences, those thinking machines humanity had become dependent on, turned on their creators in a rebellion so savage that the scars are still visible in the Mechanicum's paranoia. Terra itself descended into madness. The cradle of humanity became a battlefield for techno-barbarian warlords who fought over the irradiated waste with weapons they barely understood, scavenged from the ruins of the dark age of technology. For thousands of years, the Emperor had waited, guided, and hoped that humanity could learn to manage itself. But the Age of Strife made it clear that hope was not enough. Subtlety had failed. Patience had failed. If humanity was to survive, it needed absolute unity, enforced by absolute power. And so, after millennia of working in shadow, the Emperor finally stepped into the light. He did not ask for loyalty. He took it. The techno-barbarian tribes of Terra were brutal, superstitious, and fragmented, and the Emperor dismantled them one by one with a precision that bordered on contempt. He had created the Thunder Warriors, genetically engineered super soldiers who were stronger, faster, and more savage than anything the warlords could field. They were not elegant. They were not meant to last. They were a weapon designed for a specific purpose, unification through overwhelming force, and they fulfilled that purpose with bloody efficiency. The unification wars were not a negotiation. They were an extermination of everything that resisted his vision. By the time the last warlord knelt or died, Terra was united under one banner, and the Emperor stood at its head, no longer hidden, no longer subtle. He was the master of mankind, and his word was law. But Terra alone was not enough. Humanity had spread across the stars, and out there in the dark, on 100,000 worlds, his children were suffering, enslaved, mutated, or worse. He needed more than Thunder Warriors. He needed an army that could reclaim the galaxy. So he created the Space Marines. The Thunder Warriors had been a prototype, powerful but unstable, their bodies breaking down after a few decades of combat. The Adeptus Astartes were different. They were designed to endure, to be leaders as well as warriors, to carry his vision across the stars for centuries. But even the Space Marines were not enough. He needed champions, commanders who could think on a strategic level, who could inspire entire armies and govern entire sectors. He needed sons. The 20 Primarchs were his greatest work, gene-forged demigods created from his own genetic template, each one a reflection of a different aspect of his nature. They were perfect. They were supposed to be the foundation of his new order, the generals who would lead the Great Crusade and unite the galaxy under the banner of the Imperium. But chaos does not tolerate perfection. The ruinous powers had been watching the Emperor for a long time, and they saw the Primarchs as a threat. While the infant Primarchs were still in their gestation pods, a warp rift tore through the Emperor's laboratory deep beneath the Himalayan mountains, and the pods were scattered across the galaxy. The Emperor's sons were stolen before he could even meet them. For decades, he searched, but the warp does not give up its prizes easily. The Primarchs landed on distant worlds, raised by strangers, shaped by environments the Emperor had never intended. Some became heroes. Some became tyrants. Some became broken. And when the Emperor finally found them, one by one, during the Great Crusade, they were no longer blank slates waiting to be molded. They were individuals, with their own beliefs, their own traumas, their own ambitions. He welcomed them anyway. He gave them command of his legions, granted them authority second only to his own, and set them loose to conquer the galaxy. The Great Crusade was glorious. Fleets of warships pushed into the void, reclaiming human worlds that had been isolated since the Age of Strife. Xeno's empires were crushed. Lost technology was recovered. The Imperium expanded faster than anyone had dreamed possible. And at the heart of it all was the imperial truth, the ideology the Emperor himself preached: there are no gods, there is no superstition, only reason, science, and the manifest destiny of humanity. Religion was banned. Faith was declared ignorance. And yet, the irony was inescapable. The Emperor himself wielded power that defied all rational explanation, and entire populations fell to their knees and worshipped the moment they saw him. His Primarchs noticed. Some, like Guilliman, accepted it as a necessary fiction, a tool to maintain order. Others, like Lorgar, took it as gospel and built a religion around their father despite his explicit condemnation. The Emperor crushed Lorgar's faith with characteristic ruthlessness, humiliating the word-bearers on Monarchia, forcing them to kneel in the ashes of the city they had built as a shrine to him. It was a lesson meant to reinforce the imperial truth. Instead, it planted the first seeds of resentment. Lorgar did not stop worshipping. He simply found new gods. And he was not alone. Magnus the Red, Primarch of the Thousand Suns, delved too deeply into the mysteries of the warp, convinced that he could master it, that he could use sorcery to serve his father's vision. The Emperor had warned him, had forbidden the use of psychic powers beyond the carefully controlled discipline of the Librarius. But Magnus was arrogant, brilliant, and desperate to prove his worth. When he saw a vision of Horus's impending betrayal, he tried to warn the Emperor using warpcraft, shattering the psychic wards around the Imperial Palace and destroying the Webway Project, the Emperor's secret attempt to free humanity from dependence on warp travel. That single act of hubris doomed the Imperium more than any battle ever could. The Emperor had been building something beneath the Imperial Palace, something that would have changed everything. The Webway was an ancient network of tunnels through the Imperium, created by the Eldari before their fall, allowing instantaneous travel without the dangers of the warp. If the Emperor could connect Terra to the Webway, if he could expand it to link every human world, humanity would no longer need navigators, no longer need Gillar fields, no longer be at the mercy of warp storms or demonic incursion. It was the key to his vision of a secular, enlightened Imperium. And Magnus shattered it. The psychic shield around the gateway collapsed. Demons poured through. The Emperor had no choice but to abandon the Great Crusade, return to Terra, and take his place on the Golden Throne, using his own psychic might to hold the gate shut and prevent the palace from becoming a demon-infested hellscape. He could not leave. He could not lead his armies anymore. He had to sit on that throne every second of every day, fighting a war that no one else could see. And while he was trapped, the galaxy burned. Horus had fallen. The War Master, the Emperor's brightest son, had been corrupted on the moon of Davin, poisoned by chaos and convinced that his father had used him, that the Emperor sought godhood and planned to discard his Primarchs once they had served their purpose. It was a lie, but it was a lie built on enough truth to be convincing. The Emperor had kept secrets. He had not told his sons about chaos, about the warp's true nature, because he believed they were better off ignorant. He had not explained the Webway Project. He had not shared his ultimate goals. And in that silence, Horus found betrayal. Half the legions turned. Brother fought brother. The galaxy split in two. The Horus Heresy was the Imperium devouring itself, and every death, every atrocity, was a dagger in the Emperor's heart. He had created the Primarchs to be his sons, not just his weapons, and now they were tearing each other apart. Fulgrim, Alron, Moirion, Perturabo, Conrad Kurz, Alfarius, Lorgar, Magnus, all turned against him. And at the head of the traitors stood Horus, the one he had trusted most. The siege of Terra was the final act. The traitor legions brought their fleets to Sol, battered through the void defenses, and descended on the cradle of humanity. The walls of the Imperial Palace were breached. Demons walked the streets of Terra. The sky itself burned. Sanguinius, the angel, stood on the walls and held the line, knowing he would die, knowing that his death was necessary to buy time for his father. And die he did, struck down by Horus aboard the vengeful spirit, his wings broken, his body shattered. The Emperor could feel it, even from the throne. He could feel the death of the son who had always been the best of them, the one who embodied hope and nobility. And something inside him broke. He teleported aboard the vengeful spirit with his remaining loyalists, Dorn, Sanguinius's body, the custodians, the last desperate gambit to end the war before Terra fell completely. The confrontation between the Emperor and Horus was not just a battle. It was a tragedy. Horus was still his son, even twisted by chaos, even monstrous. The Emperor hesitated. He tried to reach the man he had known, the warrior who had once stood at his side and dreamed of a united galaxy. And Horus nearly killed him for it. The War Master unleashed power that no mortal should possess, tearing through the Emperor's defenses, shattering his armor, breaking his body. For a moment, it seemed like chaos had won. And then, a lone soldier stepped between them. The legends do not agree on who it was, a guardsman, a custodian, perhaps just a mortal with more courage than sense, but that soldier was obliterated instantly, and the sight of it, the utter contempt with which Horus erased a human life, finally made the Emperor understand. His son was gone. There was nothing left to save. And so he struck with the full measure of his power, not just destroying Horus's body but annihilating his soul, burning him out of existence so completely that even the Chaos Gods could not reclaim him. But the cost was everything. The Emperor's body was ruined, his spine shattered, his face a scorched ruin. Rogal Dorn found him barely breathing and carried him back to the Golden Throne. There was no other choice. The throne had been designed to power the webway. Now it became his prison, his life support, the only thing keeping his body tethered to life while his spirit fought an endless war in the warp. The Imperium was not built on hope. It was built on the corpses of everything that resisted, on the ashes of alien empires and human civilizations that refused to kneel, on the bones of soldiers who believed they were fighting for a better future and died before they ever saw it. The Great Crusade was not a liberation. It was a conquest. And the Emperor led it with the cold, calculated precision of someone who had lived long enough to know that mercy was a luxury he could not afford. When the Unification Wars ended and Terra stood united under his rule, there was no time to celebrate. The Mechanicum of Mars had to be brought into the fold, and that required negotiation, not conquest, because the Emperor needed the Mechanicum's technology, their forges, their Titan legions. The Treaty of Mars was a masterpiece of political manipulation. He presented himself as the Omnisia, the machine god's prophet, and the Mechanicum, desperate for leadership after the chaos of Old Night, accepted the claim. Whether he truly believed it or simply used their faith as a tool is a question that has never been answered. What matters is that it worked. The forges of Mars churned out weapons, ships, and armor for the burgeoning legions, and the Imperium gained the industrial might it needed to conquer the stars. The Space Marine legions were already being deployed, but without the Primarchs, they were incomplete. Each legion had been designed around the genetic template of its Primarch, and without their gene sire, they fought well but lacked the cohesion and identity that would make them legendary. The Emperor searched for his sons even as he launched the first waves of the Crusade, and one by one, he found them. Horus was the first, discovered on the hive world of Chthoniya, already a gang leader, already a warrior. The Emperor looked at him and saw potential, brilliance, charisma, and a hunger for glory that could be shaped into loyalty. Horus became the template for what a Primarch should be: a general, a diplomat, a leader who could inspire not just his own legion but every soldier who fought under his command. The Emperor named him War Master, and the galaxy bent before them. But Horus was not alone. Leman Russ, the Wolf King, was found on the frozen death world of Fenris, raised by wolves and as savage as the world that birthed him. He was the Emperor's executioner, the Primarch who would do the dirty work that others flinched from. Rogel Dorn, found on Inwit, became the Emperor's Praetorian, the architect who would build the defenses of the Imperial Palace and stand as an unbreakable wall. Guilliman, found on Makrich, became the logistician, the administrator, the one who turned the Imperium's chaotic expansion into something that could actually function. Each Primarch brought something unique to the Crusade, but they also brought their flaws. Omron was found on Assyria, a broken slave with archaeotech implants called the Butcher's Nails hammered into his skull, and the Emperor took him at the moment of his greatest despair, teleporting him away from the last stand where his fellow slaves were being slaughtered. Omron never forgave him for that. He had wanted to die with his brothers and sisters, and instead, he was forced to live, to serve, to watch the nails slowly destroy his mind until there was nothing left but rage. The Emperor could have removed the nails. He had the technology. He chose not to, because Omron was still useful as a weapon. That decision would cost the Imperium dearly. Mordorion was found on Barbarous, a world shrouded in poison fog, ruled by necromantic overlords. He had spent his entire life fighting those overlords, leading human rebels, and when the Emperor arrived and offered to help, Mordorion refused. He wanted to defeat the final tyrant himself, to prove that humanity did not need gods or saviors. The Emperor agreed to let him try, but when Mordorion failed, when the poison fog overcame him and he collapsed within sight of victory, the Emperor stepped in and killed the tyrant for him. Mordorion knelt, but he never stopped resenting the fact that his greatest triumph had been taken from him. These were not the perfect sons the Emperor had envisioned. They were warriors shaped by hardship, by betrayal, by worlds that had tried to break them. And the Emperor took them anyway, because he needed them, and because somewhere deep in his unfathomable mind, he might have actually cared. The Great Crusade pushed outward with terrifying momentum. Expeditionary fleets launched into the void, each one a self-contained war machine capable of crushing entire star systems. Compliance was the goal, bring human worlds back into the Imperium, by negotiation if possible, by force if necessary. And if a world refused, if its population was too corrupted, too alien, too far gone, it was marked for exterminatus. The Imperium did not have time for mercy. There were millions of worlds to reclaim, and every second wasted was a second that chaos could exploit. The imperial truth was preached on every conquered world. The Emperor's ideology was absolute: no gods, no religion, no superstition. Humanity would be guided by reason and science, and the old ways, the beliefs that had made humanity vulnerable to the warp, would be eradicated. It was a noble lie. Because even as the Emperor preached atheism, even as he burned temples and executed priests, entire worlds fell to their knees and worshipped him. They saw his power, his immortality, his radiance, and they called him a god. The Emperor rejected the title, but he did not stop them from kneeling. The contradiction was glaring, but it was also necessary. Worship was a tool, and the Emperor used every tool available. The Primarchs led their legions into the dark, and the galaxy trembled. The Luna Wolves, later the sons of Horus, were the tip of the spear, the legion that brought more worlds into compliance than any other. Horus was the Emperor's favorite, and he knew it, and he used that favor to build a network of loyalty among his brother Primarchs. He was the diplomat, the peacemaker, the one who could smooth over conflicts and keep the crusade moving forward. But beneath that charm, there was ambition. Horus wanted to be great, to be remembered, to be more than just the Emperor's tool. And the Emperor, for all his wisdom, did not see the danger in that desire. The Ultramarines, under Guilliman, became the largest legion, the most organized, the most adaptable. Guilliman did not just conquer worlds, he rebuilt them, integrated them into the Imperium with bureaucratic efficiency, and created the infrastructure that would allow the Crusade to sustain itself. He was pragmatic, almost cold, but he was also incorruptible. The Imperial fists, under Dorn, became the defenders, the builders, the legion that fortified every gain and ensured that what was taken could not be lost. Dorn was loyal to a fault, and that loyalty would define him when everything fell apart. But not all the legions were as stable. The word-bearers, under Lorgar, spread the imperial truth with zealous fervor, but Lorgar did not see it as truth. He saw it as faith, and he built temples to the Emperor despite his commands to stop. For decades, Lorgar worshipped in secret, convinced that his father was simply being humble, that he would eventually accept his divinity. And then the Emperor arrived at Monarchia, the perfect city Lorgar had built as a monument to him, and he ordered the Ultramarines to destroy it. The city burned. The word-bearers were forced to kneel in the ashes. And Lorgar's faith did not die, it twisted. If the Emperor would not accept worship, then Lorgar would find gods who would. He found them in the warp, and he found them eager to welcome him. The Thousand Sons, under Magnus, pursued knowledge with the same fervor that Lorgar had pursued faith. Magnus believed that the warp could be understood, controlled, mastered. He saw psychic power as the next step in human evolution, and he rejected the Emperor's warnings as paranoia. The Council of Nicaea, where the Emperor banned the use of sorcery within the legions, was a humiliation for Magnus. He obeyed, but he did not stop his research. He simply hid it. And when he saw Horus fall into chaos, when he realized the War Master was about to betray the Emperor, Magnus did the only thing he thought he could do. He used warpcraft to send a warning. He shattered the psychic wards around the Imperial Palace, destroyed the Webway Project, and doomed the Emperor to the Golden Throne. It was an act of desperation, of arrogance, of love, and it was the worst mistake Magnus ever made. The Emperor had no choice but to return to Terra. The Great Crusade continued without him, led by Horus and the other Primarchs, but something had changed. Without the Emperor's presence, without his authority to mediate disputes, the cracks in the Crusade began to show. Legions competed for glory. Primarchs clashed over doctrine. Worlds that had been brought into compliance rebelled when they realized the Imperium was not the salvation they had been promised but a brutal, authoritarian regime that demanded absolute obedience. The imperial truth rang hollow when enforced at gunpoint. And in the shadows, chaos whispered. Erebus, the first chaplain of the word-bearers, had been corrupted long before Monarchia, and he worked tirelessly to spread the corruption to others. He manipulated Lorgar into embracing the chaos gods. He poisoned Horus on Davin, using a demonic weapon to wound the War Master and then healing him with a ritual that bound his soul to chaos. He was the architect of the heresy, the one who set brother against brother, and the Emperor never saw him coming. The Webway War raged beneath the Imperial Palace, a conflict that never ended, that consumed the Emperor's attention and his power. He sat on the Golden Throne, holding the Shattered Gate closed, directing the Custodian Guard and the Sisters of Silence in a desperate battle against endless waves of demons. Thousands died every day in tunnels that the Imperium pretends do not exist, fighting a war that can never be won, only endured. And while the Emperor fought that war, the galaxy he had been trying to save descended into madness. The Emperor had built the Imperium on the idea that he was necessary, that only he could guide humanity, and he had been proven right in the worst possible way. Without him, the Crusade fell apart. Without him, the Primarchs turned on each other. Without him, chaos found purchase in the hearts of his sons. And there was nothing he could do but watch, because if he left the throne, the palace would fall and Terra would become a demon world. The heresy was inevitable. That is the most bitter truth. The Emperor had created beings of immense power, given them autonomy, and then kept them in the dark about the greatest threat to the Imperium. He had not trusted his sons with the truth about chaos, and that lack of trust had festered. When Horus and the others fell, they did so not because they were weak, but because they had been kept ignorant and then faced with horrors they did not understand. The Emperor's greatest mistake was not arrogance or cruelty, it was silence. He believed he could protect his sons by keeping them ignorant. Instead, he made them vulnerable. And chaos, ever patient, ever insidious, exploited that vulnerability with surgical precision. The War Master's betrayal began slowly. Horus had always been the most human of the Primarchs, the one who craved recognition, who wanted his father's approval more than anything. And when the Emperor returned to Terra and left Horus to lead the crusade alone, that need for approval turned to resentment. Chaos whispered that the Emperor had used him, that all the Primarchs were just tools to be discarded once the crusade was over. It was a lie, but it was a lie that Horus wanted to believe, because believing it gave him permission to do what part of him had always wanted, take the Imperium for himself. The Isstvan III atrocity was the first open act of rebellion. Horus ordered the loyalists within his legion and the legions of the other traitor Primarchs down to the surface of Isstvan III under the pretense of a compliance action. And then he bombarded the planet from orbit with virus bombs, killing millions of his own sons in a single act of betrayal. Those who survived the initial bombardment were hunted down by the traitors, and the few who escaped brought word back to Terra. The War Master had turned. The Emperor knew, but he could not leave the throne. He sent the Space Wolves against Magnus, believing the Thousand Sons were complicit in the destruction of the Webway project. He sent Roboldorn to fortify Terra. He called back every loyal legion within reach, but space is vast, and the warp is treacherous, and many never made it home. The traitors moved faster. The drop site massacre at Isstvan V shattered the loyalist response. 3 legions, Raven Guard, Salamanders, Iron Hands, descended to the surface to confront the traitors, and 3 more Iron Warriors, Night Lords, Alpha Legion, were supposed to support them. Instead, those 3 turned their guns on their brothers, and the loyalists were slaughtered. Ferrus Manus, Primarch of the Iron Hands, was beheaded by Fulgrim, his closest brother, and his head was presented to Horus as a trophy. The massacre was total, and the traitors controlled half the galaxy. The road to Terra was long and bloody. The traitors had to consolidate their forces, corrupt or destroy every world that stood in their way, and prepare for a siege that would determine the fate of the Imperium. And they had time, because the Emperor was trapped. He could not lead. He could not inspire. He could only hold the gate and trust that his loyal sons would be enough. Jagatai Khan, Leman Russ, Roboldorn, Sanguinius, the Lion, Gilliman, Corvus Corax, Vulcan, each one fought their own desperate battles, trying to slow the traitors, trying to reach Terra in time. But the warp was Chaos's domain, and the traitors had the advantage. The siege of Terra began 7 years after Isstvan. The skies above the Imperial Palace turned black with ships. Legions of traitor space marines, supported by demons, titans, and corrupted Imperial army regiments, descended on Terra. The walls of the palace, built by Dorn to withstand any assault, were breached. The Lion's Gate, the Eternity Wall, the Ultimate Gate, each one became a battlefield where brothers killed brothers and the ground was soaked with blood. Sanguinius knew he was going to die. He had seen it in a vision, seen Horus standing over his broken body. But he went to the vengeful spirit anyway, because that was what duty demanded. The Emperor felt Sanguinius die. He felt the angel's soul flicker and go out, and for a moment, the gate beneath the palace almost collapsed, because the Emperor's focus wavered. But he held. He endured. And when he finally teleported aboard the vengeful spirit, when he stood before Horus and saw what his son had become, he understood that there was no redemption possible. Horus had been hollowed out, filled with the power of all 4 chaos gods, and there was nothing of the man he had loved left inside that shell. The battle between them tore reality. The Emperor held back, hoping, and Horus nearly killed him for it. Only when the lone soldier died did the Emperor finally unleash his full power, and even then, it cost him everything. His body was destroyed. His plans were ruined. The Imperium he had built to be rational and secular was already transforming into a theocratic nightmare. And still, he could not die, because if he did, the gate would open, and demons would pour into the palace. So he sat on the throne, and he has sat there for 10,000 years, and he will sit there until either he or the Imperium finally dies. 10,000 years is not a number the human mind can comprehend. It is longer than recorded history. It is longer than empires. It is an eternity of stagnation, of suffering, of grinding, endless war. And for every single second of those 10,000 years, the Emperor of mankind has sat on the golden throne, unable to move, unable to speak, unable to die. His body is a corpse. His skin is desiccated parchment stretched over bones that should have crumbled to dust millennia ago. His face is a rictus of agony, his eyes empty sockets, his mouth frozen in a silent scream. The golden throne is not a throne, it is a prison, a torture device, a life support system powered by the sacrifice of 1,000 psychers every single day. They are brought before the throne in chains, these psychers, dragged from black ships that scour the Imperium for those touched by the warp. Some are children. Some are old. All of them are terrified. And all of them are fed into the mechanism of the throne, their souls burned away to sustain the Emperor's flickering existence. It is the cruelest irony in a galaxy built on cruelty. The Emperor, who sought to protect humanity from the predations of chaos, is sustained by human sacrifice. The Imperium, which preaches that he is a god, butchers its own people to keep that god alive. The Adeptus Ministorum does not call it sacrifice. They call it apotheosis, ascension, the highest honor a citizen of the Imperium can achieve. The psychers are told they will join the Emperor's light, become one with his divine essence. Some believe it. Most do not. It does not matter. The throne is hungry, and the Imperium feeds it, because the alternative is extinction. If the Emperor dies, the Astronomicon dies with him. The Astronomicon is a psychic beacon, a lighthouse in the warp that allows navigators to guide ships through the immaterium. Without it, faster-than-light travel becomes impossible. Every fleet, every trade route, every communication across the Imperium depends on that beacon, and it is powered by the Emperor's will. If it goes out, the Imperium fractures into a million isolated worlds, each one alone in the dark, easy prey for chaos, for Xenos, for the 1,000 horrors that prowl the galaxy. And beneath the palace, the gate still yawns open, held shut only by the Emperor's psychic might. Demons press against it every second, clawing, gnawing, testing the barrier for weaknesses. If the Emperor dies, the gate opens, and Terra becomes the largest demon world in existence. So the Imperium feeds him souls, and he endures, because there is no other choice. But something is changing. The Emperor's presence in the warp has grown. For 10,000 years, his psychic projection has been scattered, fragmented, holding the Astronomicon, fighting demons, guiding the faithful in a million small ways. Some say he speaks to saints, to the truly devout, granting them visions and miracles. The ecclesiarchy claims these as proof of his divinity. The Inquisition investigates every one, because miracles are just as likely to be demonic trickery. But in the last few centuries, there have been reports of something more. A figure made of light, appearing on battlefields, destroying demons with a gesture. A presence felt across entire sectors, calming warp storms, guiding lost fleets home. The Emperor is becoming more active, more coherent, and no one knows if that is a blessing or a sign that the end is near. Some tech priests believe the Golden Throne is failing. It is ancient technology, built during the Dark Age, and even the Mechanicum cannot fully repair it. They perform maintenance rituals, replace failing components with inferior substitutes, pray to the Omnicia that it will hold together for another century. But every year, the throne requires more power, more psychers, more desperate measures. And every year, the risk grows that one day, the throne will simply stop working and the Emperor will die. What happens then is a question that divides the Imperium. The ecclesiarchy believes the Emperor will rise, reborn in glory, and lead humanity to final victory. The Inquisition fears he will become a fifth chaos god, a deity of humanity's suffering and fanaticism. The Mechanicum calculates probabilities and finds none favorable. And somewhere, in the deepest vaults of the imperial palace, there are those who whisper that the emperor should be allowed to die, that his death might be the only thing that can save the Imperium, because a god reborn might be able to do what a corpse cannot. But no one dares act on that belief, because the risk is too great. So the Imperium endures, and the emperor endures, and the galaxy burns. The Imperium the emperor built is not the Imperium that survived him. He created a secular state built on reason, science, and the manifest destiny of the human race. What remains is a theocratic tyranny built on fear, ignorance, and fanaticism. The Adeptus Ministorum, the state church that worships the emperor as a god, controls the spiritual life of trillions. The Inquisition enforces orthodoxy with torture and execution. The Adeptus Mechanicus hoards knowledge and treats innovation as heresy. The administratum drowns in bureaucracy so vast that entire worlds can be lost in paperwork. And the Astra Militarum, the Imperial Guard, throws millions of soldiers into meat grinder wars where victory is measured in how many die for the Emperor. This is what the Emperor's dream became. He wanted to free humanity from superstition, and instead, he became the central figure in the most oppressive religion the galaxy has ever seen. He wanted to unite humanity through enlightenment, and instead, he created an empire where questioning the state religion is punishable by death. The Imperial Creed teaches that the Emperor is divine, that suffering is sacred, that death in his service is the only meaningful life. And the worst part is that the creed works. It gives meaning to the meaningless. It gives hope to the hopeless. It turns ordinary humans into fanatics who will fight demons with nothing but faith and a lost gun. The Space Marines, the Emperor's Angels of Death, are still the Imperium's greatest weapon. They are revered as demigods, and they fulfill that role with precision. The remaining loyalist chapters, descended from the original 9 legions, crusade endlessly against the enemies of the Imperium. The Ultramarines uphold order. The Blood Angels struggle with the Red Thirst and the Black Rage, curses inherited from Sanguinius's death. The Dark Angels hunt the fallen, the traitors from their own legion who turned during the heresy. The Space Wolves remain savage and loyal, executioners who answer to no one but the Emperor. And 10,000 Adeptus Custodes stand guard over the Imperial Palace, the custodian guard who have never left Terra since the heresy, because their only duty is to protect the Emperor. They are the best warriors humanity has ever produced, each one a work of art, gene-crafted by the Emperor himself. They do not know brotherhood the way Space Marines do. They do not form bonds. They are weapons, and their purpose is singular. And they have failed, because the Emperor is dying, and there is nothing they can do to stop it. The traitor legions, now called the Chaos Space Marines, have not been idle. They fled into the Eye of Terror, a warp rift where reality and madness blend, and they have waged the long war for 10,000 years. They raid imperial worlds, corrupt entire systems, and dream of finishing what Horus started. Abaddon the Despoiler, War Master of Chaos and Horus's successor, has launched 13 Black Crusades from the Eye of Terror, each one a galaxy-spanning invasion. The 13th, the most recent, succeeded in tearing the galaxy in half with the opening of the Great Rift, a warp storm that now divides the Imperium into 2 halves, Imperium Sanctus, the half that still has contact with Terra, and Imperium Nihilus, the half that is cut off, drowning in darkness and chaos. The Emperor cannot stop it. He can only hold the Astronomicon, and even that is weakening. The light that once reached across the entire galaxy now flickers in Nihilus, and navigators report that the warp is becoming more violent, more hostile, more impossible to traverse. The galaxy is dying, and the Emperor is dying with it. And yet, there are miracles. The return of Robot Guilliman, Primarch of the Ultramarines, brought hope that the Imperium did not deserve. He had been in stasis for 10,000 years, preserved in a stasis field after being poisoned by Fulgrim, and when he finally woke, he found an Imperium that horrified him. This was not what his father had built. This was not what he had fought for. The superstition, the cruelty, the inefficiency, it was everything the Emperor had tried to destroy. But Guilliman is pragmatic. He does not waste time mourning what was lost. He works with what remains. He launched the Great Crusade, a galaxy-spanning campaign to reclaim lost worlds and push back the forces of chaos. He met with the Emperor, or what remains of him, in the throne room, and what passed between them is known only to Gilliman. But when he emerged, he looked like a man who had lost his last illusion. The Emperor, he realized, was not a father anymore. He was something else, something vast and cold and utterly inhuman. Whether that is progress or damnation, no one can say. There is a theory, whispered in the darkest corners of the Inquisition, that the Emperor is not holding the Imperium together, he is holding himself back. That the only reason he has not ascended to full godhood is because he is still clinging to his mortality, still trying to be what he was instead of accepting what he is becoming. 10,000 years of worship, of prayer, of faith from trillions of humans has created something in the warp. A reflection of the Emperor, a God born from humanity's collective belief. And that God is not kind. It is not merciful. It is a God of war, of sacrifice, of endless suffering, because that is what the Imperium has become. If the Emperor dies, if he finally lets go, that God will be born fully, and it will either save the Imperium or destroy it. The Ecclesiarchy prays for the former. The Inquisition prepares for the latter. And the Emperor, locked in his eternal prison, says nothing. The Golden Throne is failing. That is not speculation. It is fact. The tech priests report that critical systems are degrading faster than they can be repaired. The psychic load required to sustain the Emperor is increasing. More psychers are needed every year, and the black ships can barely keep up with demand. There are projections, hidden deep in Mechanicum data vaults, that estimate the throne has less than 1,000 years left. Maybe less. And when it fails, when the last system gives out and the Emperor's body finally collapses, one of three things will happen. The first possibility is that he dies, the Astronomicon goes out, the gate opens, and Terra becomes a demon world. The Imperium fractures and is devoured by chaos within a century. The second possibility is that he dies, and his soul, empowered by 10,000 years of worship, is reborn as a god in the warp, a new power capable of fighting the chaos gods on equal footing. The Imperium might survive under the guidance of a deity who actually exists. The third possibility is that he does not die. That his soul is strong enough to sustain itself even without the throne, that he becomes a perpetual presence in the warp, guiding the Imperium forever, never truly alive, never truly dead, an eternal ghost ruling an empire of corpses. No one knows which future is real. The Emperor is not speaking. He has not spoken since he was placed on the throne 10,000 years ago. There are those who claim to hear his voice, saints, psychers, madmen, but their words are contradictory, unreliable, tainted by their own desires and fears. The Emperor might be guiding the Imperium. He might be insane. He might be nothing more than a psychic echo, a corpse kept animate by technology and sacrifice. The truth is unknowable, and in the Imperium, truth does not matter. Only faith matters. And faith in the Emperor is the one thing the Imperium has in abundance. Every soldier who dies on a distant battlefield dies believing the Emperor is watching. Every citizen who suffers under the cruelty of the Administratum suffers believing it is part of his plan. Every psyker fed into the throne goes to their death believing they are serving the greatest being who ever lived. And maybe they are. Or maybe they are dying for a lie, for a dream that died with Horus on the vengeful spirit, for an empire that should have collapsed millennia ago but is kept alive by sheer, bloody-minded refusal to accept the inevitable. The Emperor of mankind is not a hero. He is not a villain. He is a tragedy. He was born from the sacrifice of thousands, lived for tens of thousands of years trying to save humanity from itself, and in the end, created the very nightmare he sought to prevent. He is worshipped as a god by an empire he despised, sustained by the sacrifice of innocence, and trapped in a prison of his own making. His dream of a rational, enlightened humanity free from superstition died on the walls of the imperial palace, but his body endures, because the Imperium needs him to endure. Without the Emperor, there is no Imperium. Without the Imperium, there is no humanity. And so he sits on the golden throne, rotting and eternal, a corpse god whose silence might be wisdom or madness or simply exhaustion. The galaxy burns. The Imperium suffers. And the Emperor endures, because there is no other choice. In the grim darkness of the far future, there is only war. And at the center of that war, on a throne built from the ruins of a dream, sits the Emperor of mankind, and he has been dying for 10,000 years, and he will die for 10,000 more, and maybe, when he finally falls, the Imperium will fall with him, and something new will rise from the ashes. Or maybe nothing will rise at all. Maybe the Emperor is the last light in the galaxy, and when he goes out, the darkness will be absolute. That is the price of godhood. That is the price of immortality. That is the price of trying to save a species that might not be worth saving. And the Emperor pays it every second of every day, forever.